With the help of Hashem, we are learning Chagiga, Daf, Chav, Gimel. We left off on Daf Chav Beis, Amid Beis, 17 lines before the bottom of the Amid. We learned yesterday the Gemara's explanation of the first of the 11 milas or chumras that Chazal gave to Kodesh over Truma, as we learned in the Mishnah on Daf Chav Amid Beis. And today we're going to pick up with Mila number 2, with the second stringency that we find by Kodesh over Truma. And the words that we have in the Mishnah is that Achoirayim, which means the outer part of the utensil, and the Toich and the inner part of the utensil, and the Beis HaTzvita, as we'll explain, one of the meanings might be the handle of the Keli, are considered separate Kelim as far as Truma is concerned, but they're considered one Keli as far as Kodesh is concerned. This is a Pashat HaMayla that has to be elaborated. We'll explain it in the beginning of today's shiur. We're going to move on to the third Mayla, or the third Chaymer B'Kodesh over Truma, and that is that Chazal made a takana that when you are carrying a barrel of Truma, you are allowed to carry at the same time even something that has the Truma on the level of a Midrash. We'll explain again. It means even something that's Tomei on the level of an Av. And the reason why you are allowed to do it is because when we carry Truma dafke in a earthenware utensil, the rule is that any klei cheres cannot acquire Truma, even if there is contact, but if the contact of Truma to the earthenware utensil is only from the outer part of the keli, it doesn't become Tomei. So if I'm carrying a barrel of Truma in one hand, I'm carrying something Tomei in the other hand, what's the worst case scenario? That by mistake, my hands will come together? Doesn't matter. You won't make a tummy anyways. But by Kodesh, they were machmir because there is a possibility, as we'll see it happen once, that item actually was placed on top of the barrel. It entered the barrel. It went inside the ear space of the barrel. That story happened by Kodesh. And we have throughout Shas, very few times, but a very interesting phenomenon, that if a event actually happened, there was a Maisa Shahaya, sometimes Chazal made a takana because of that Maisa to enact something. If you remember, we learned on Shabbos regarding wearing those spiked sandals. There was once an event where Rahman al-Islam were people thinking that an enemy is attacking them, and they were hiding in a cave, and they were wearing these spiked sandals. They ran out of the cave, and there was a trampling of one person on top of the other. So they made a takana, if you remember, and we'll go through other scenarios that sometimes Chazal, this is with Ruach HaKodesh, they interpret a one-time event as the reaction was that exact scenario may no longer happen again. And that's how we'll explain the third case in the Mishnah. We're going to skip the fourth and the fifth, and I'll explain why. The Gemara is going to jump from the third case, to the sixth case in the Mishnah. And because of that, we're going to learn, a tremendous halacha as far as preparing the para aduma is concerned. Until now, as the Rambam writes, until Mashiach, we prepared a total of 9 red heifers. The 10th one will be prepared by Mashiach himself. And as we'll see, this will be another area in halacha where lohoitzi mi liban shel tzedukim. The tzedukim wrongfully had a certain halacha. And in order to make it clear that we don't follow the way they understand halacha, and we'll go into all the details when we learn today's daf, there was something dafka that we did. We will see how, on one hand, we were lenient when it comes to the preparation of the para aduma in one area, lohoitzi mi liban shel tzedukim. But to counterbalance that, we are very machmir when it comes to the making of the para aduma. B'chlal, as we keep on learning, beginning on Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis, that when it comes to levels of holiness or the items that are more or less susceptible to tumah, the highest one is mechatos. Mechatos can even become tamei on a level of a chamishi, because there are certain enactments rabbinically which makes them the most vulnerable to tumah. Nevertheless, these are the words ma'olam loichichu davar beparim, which means that as much as the Chachamim felt you have to be machmir to counterbalance the leniency which was made, but a real chiddush they never made. We'll see exactly what that applies to. And let us start again on Daf Chav Beis, Amid Beis, 17 lines before the bottom of the Amid. Mamish, the last word, No, not the last word, the third to last word in the line, quoting back to the second case of the Mishnah, that when it comes to Truma, we have a leniency that at times we can consider one utensil not as one unit, but as various units, meaning that we view the achirayim, the back part of the utensil, toich, the inner part of the utensil, the beis atzfita, again, one meaning will be the handle of the utensil as really separate utensils as far as Truma is concerned. My achorayim v'toich. When do we indeed, by Truma, and certainly by Ma'aser Sheni, and certainly by Chulin, consider a keli not to be one unit, which it is, but different units, which is a big leniency. In other words, what we are basically saying, and let's go specifically to this case, that if something that's tamei touches the outer part of the keli, if it can only convey tuma midrabanan, Chazal said only the outer part of the keli is tamei and not the inner part. And that is only said regarding truma or things that are less susceptible than truma, Ma'aser Sheni and Chulin. But by kodesh, even if the source of truma is rabbinic and it touches the outer part of the keli, all of the keli is tamei. So it says the Gemara Kidatanan. This is as we learned in the Mishnah in Kalim. Liquids touch the keli. Let's remember that other than a few exceptions, food and liquids normally are only tamei on the level of rishain. Biblically, a rishain can never make a utensil a sheni. The end of the line for Adam and Kalim is rishain, which means that normally if a liquid that's tamei, midoraisa, biblically tamei, touches a utensil, the utensil b'chlal will not become tamei. However, came along the Chachamim and they said the following, that since there are some liquids that are tamei on the level of Av, meaning there are some liquids that biblically could and will convey tumah to utensils. Liquids are those, any bodily fluid that's coming from a person that was deemed a zav. Well, I take back the word any. Some of the body fluids of the zav has the tumah of the level of an Av. For example, the spittle of a zav. For example, the semen of the zav. Anything that's gathered in the body and at times is expelled has the level of an Av. So if, let's say, the spittle of the zav were to touch the outer or the inner part of a keli, then biblically the keli would become a rishon, because an Av is metame yakeli midorais, makes it into a rishon. But that's the exception. Normally, food and liquids, they become tamei because someone that touched the corpse, who became an Av, touched food or touched liquids. Those liquids are tamei on the level of a rishon, and a rishon cannot convey tumah to a keli. Chachamim said liquids will convey tumah to a keli. The keli is tamei midrabanan. Now here's the caveat. Here's the challenge. And that's a rule in life. Many times people think, oh, I'm going to go beyond the letter of the law. Nice, good to you. Don't think that when you go beyond the letter of the law, all you are doing is adding stringencies. No, you're not. You might end up adding leniencies. When you want to be super religious, you might be minus religious. For example, truma or kachin that are not impure may not be burnt. Truma or kachin that becomes biblically impure must be burnt. Because if you're not going to destroy it, someone might erroneously, accidentally eat it. So let me ask you, what do you do with truma or kachim that is only tamei midrabanan? It's not so simple. On one hand, it's tamei midrabanan. You cannot consume it. On the other hand, you can't say, well, go burn it, because biblically it's tahar, and it's disrespectful to burn kachim if it's biblically pure. So there's something called toilin, which means you leave it hanging. It doesn't mean you physically hang it. It means that it's like a twilight zone. You can't do anything to it until it becomes completely invalidated on a biblical level, and only then you can destroy it. So whenever the Chachamim said, there's Tumah Midrabanan, they always needed to be mindful of, hold on, people have to know that that Tumah is only rabbinic. Because if they're going to think the Tumah is Doiraisa, if that will now have contact with Truma or Kachim, people are going to burn it, which may not be done. So they decided when it comes to this rabbinic Tumah, that liquids that touch a keli will be metama the keli midrabanan. In order for people to remember that it's only a Tumah midrabanan, they said that if the liquids touch the outside of a utensil, only the outside of the utensil is tamei midrabanan. The inside of the keli remains fully pure. That will serve as a reminder, because on a biblical level, either you're tamei or you're tar. It's mamish like we spoke about tumas yodayim. Tumas yodayim, the concept that only one's hands is tamei, means it's a rabbinic tumah. Because on a biblical level, either you're pure or you're impure. All of you. There's no body parts over here. Rabbinically, again, it's like a reminder. It's tamei, only midrabanan, so it's only on your hands. Very similar here. It's only tamei, only the outside. Now you understand the Mishnah. If something impure touches the outside of a utensil, only the outside of the utensil is tamei. The inside of the utensil remains pure. The handle, the beis hatzfita, remains pure. But that's only true concerning truma. Certainly true concerning ma'aser sheni. Certainly true concerning chulin. For kodesh, even though it's only a rabbinic tumah, and even though if this keli will now touch kachim, you may never burn it, you have to just leave it hanging. But still, since kodesh is more susceptible to tumah, they never allowed for this part tumah. Either it's tamei or it's not. And if it's tamei midrabanan, people should remember it's tamei midrabanan. Now another nuance. Even for truma, ma'aser sheni and chulin, if the source of rabbinic tumah, if the rishon liquids went inside the keli, all of the keli is tamei. All of the keli is tamei. Because just like we find by earthenware utensils, biblically, it cannot become tamei if the contact was outside of it. It does become tamei if the source goes inside of it. So you see on a biblical level that if the source of tumah makes contact in the inside, it permeates tumah more. So therefore, they want to. It's enough as a reminder that it's tamei midrabanan to only enact it if the liquids touched either the inside or the outside. And they decided better to say this leniency when it touches outside of the keli. The leniency of only the outside is tamei midrabanan. The inside remains completely tight, even midrabanan. But if the liquids touch the inside of a keli, all of it is tamei. So it's going to be more aligned with the biblical law that the inside is more chamer than the outside. Let's read it inside. Again, as it says in the Mishnah and Kalim, this is 60 lines before the bottom of the Amid. That if liquids that are in the level of a rishon that can only convey tumah to a keli midrabanan, if they touch the outside of a keli, only achayr of tamein, only the outside is tamei. But the inner part of that utensil, the rim of the keli, oznoi the yadav, the ears and the handles, they both refer to a handle. One is going to be a rounded handle, known as an ear, a teacup. One is called a yadav, means a straight handle. They remain tahor. That's the leniency, which we don't say by kach. However, even when it comes to truma, if nitma toichai, if the source of tumah, which only conveys tumah midrabanan, had contact with the inner part of the keli, then kulei tamei. Okay. Now the Mishnah mentioned the outside, the inside, and the beis hatzfita. Vechulei. The Gemara wants to know what's the meaning of beis hatzfita. Amar Rav Yehuda. The Amoira says in the name of Shmuel, his interpretation, the place by which you hand the utensil over to someone else. It means the handle of the utensil. And as we find the pasuk, that he handed parched grain to her, so handing something over is vayitzpat. However, Rabbi Asi Yom Rabbi Yechanan says it refers to another little part of the utensil, which could be considered as a separated part of the utensil. Makim shenikia hadas, people that are very finicky, they dip their food in the keli. Now, when people used to have dips, the kelim today, because of the world that we live in, kelim have almost no value. We have disposables that are extremely inexpensive. In those days, kelim were hard to come by. So if, let's say you're having a meal and you have a mustard dip or a vinegar dip, where did you put that, the dip? Where did you put that? Many people would put it in their cup. And then when they wanted to drink liquid, they would throw out the remaining mustard or vinegar and they would fill it up with water. But people that were finicky, they're not going to put in their wine glass, in their water glass, they're not going to put a dip. So what they did was that in their plates, in their utensils, they made in one part a deeper indentation. And over there, they would put their dip. No, it's not the same level as the rest of the bowl. So it's like a bowl in a bowl or a little bowl in a plate. Point is that since it's considered a separate part of the utensil, again, whenever there's only rabbinic tumah touching the keli, conveying tumah only midrabanan, we say that if it touched the outer is tummy. The inner part, this indentation, the handle, it's not tummy, even rabbinically, for truma, but yes, for kodesh. Tana Rav Bibi Kamed Rav Nachman. When it comes to all of the utensils, we don't make a distinction between the outside and the inside when we're speaking about kachim, which is what we learned in the Mishnah. That's the chomer of kodesh over truma. But he added another detail. Whether we're speaking about kachim, we never differentiate, we never separate one utensil. And now he's adding the echad kachim gevul, holy matters, holy items that are eaten on the borders. What does that mean? We'll see in a moment. Here also, we never separate the outer and the inner. Even if it's only rabbinic tumah, if any part has contact, all of it becomes tamei. Amalei. So this needed to be clarified. Rav Nachman asked him, what do you mean when you're quoting this braisa? Kache gevul ma'ininu. Normally, the word kache gevul is in reference to truma, which makes sense because truma is holy, but truma doesn't have to be eaten in Yerushalayim. It can be eaten anywhere. But that can't be the meaning of this braisa because we learned in our Mishnah that's the whole point. Again, as we also have in Kalim, that achoirayim toicho beis atzvita are not considered the same as far as truma is concerned. If the source of tumah of mashkin tameim rishon touches a keli, ma'achayt of the inner is completely taught. So Dilma, maybe what the Braisa means, lachulin shenasu al taras hakodesh. Kache gevul means full-fledged chulin, owned by someone who made this hachlata to treat his or her chulin mamish the way you treat kachin. And that's called kache gevul because it could be eaten anywhere. When we're saying a person treats their chulin like kachim, it doesn't mean that they can only eat it in the temple compound. It doesn't mean they can only eat it in Yerushalayim. It just means that it's susceptible to tumah as if it's kachim. And indeed, that's the meaning of the Braisa. And as the Gemara confirms, that atkiron or atkarton milso, that this now we remembered, now that you brought up that possibility, that which was said by Rabba Baravua. That what? That Achad Esrei Mailo Shanu Khan, that our Mishnah actually enumerated 11 stringencies from Kodesh over Truma. And the first 6, which includes, now we're focusing still on number 2, are not only true when it comes to Kodesh, but they are also true when it comes to Chulun Shel Nasu Al Taras HaKodesh. It's only the latter 5, you guys, we already learned this, which we only applied those stringencies to Kodesh, Abaloi L'Chulun Shel Nasu Al Taras HaKodesh, because there isn't even a drara the Isura Da'iraisa, drara the Tuma Da'iraisa. That's exactly what this Braisa means. Okay, moving on now to the third. We can always refer back to the Mishnah on the Chaf on the base. So what was number 3? Number 3 is that if a person is carrying midras, now the word midras means something that's trampled upon, but that's not what it means. That's just a literal type. Midras means that the people that become tamei, not because they touched the corpse or had contact with the corpse, not they became tamei because there was some source of tumah outside of them that made them tamei. We're speaking about people that became tamei because there is tumah coming from their body, like a menstruating woman, like a zav, this unnatural or unusual or unhealthy seminal type of emissions that come out of a person that render the person into a zav, or a matzoida, etc. So there are certain people that are tamei on the level of an av, but there is an extra stringency that the Torah writes regarding them, and that is that if they sit or lay upon something that was meant to be sat or laid upon, not only do they convey tumah to it, which is normal, but that item becomes tamei on their level. So if a zav sits on a chair or on a bed, the bed becomes an av. Not only the bed, but the box spring, but the frame, anything that is considered the keli that is susceptible to becoming tamei, if the weight of the zav was on that, it becomes tamei on the level of an av. Now, by the way, that includes shoes. Shoes were meant for people to walk in. So the shoes of a zav or of a zava or of a nida, they have the din of an av. Now, if I'm carrying such a pair of shoes in my hand, can I carry truma? Now, guys, some we have to also know that we need to have common sense. If the food item that I am carrying is not contained, then common sense, don't do that. Don't hold two items that one can make the other tamei, especially if we're speaking about truma. Truma may not become tamei. The Torah tells us to guard the truma. Don't carry av and truma. Don't do that. But 1 second. But if the truma is in an earthenware utensil, which was very common, it's ceramic, it's cheap, it was commonly used. The upside of a ceramic, of an earthenware utensil, as I keep on mentioning, is that it only can acquire truma. Items in it can only acquire truma if the source goes inside the airspace of that keli. So if a person is carrying truma in an earthenware utensil, and they're carrying even midras in the other hand, then just using common sense will not say don't do that. Because first of all, you're going to try not to make any contact. Even if accidentally there'll be contact, nothing is going to happen halachically. But the chomer of kodesh is, that's what we learned in the Mishnah, is that if you have kodesh in an earthenware utensil, don't carry midras. Let's go read it inside. 3 lines from the bottom. Hamar says midras. If you are carrying midras, you are allowed to carry truma. Why? Kodesh might have a answers the Gemara, because of a Maisa Shahaya. There was an incident that occurred, and after that incident, the Chachamim enacted this takana. But they limited it to exactly what happened at that incident, and that was a case of Kodesh. Last line in the Amid, a person was once carrying a barrel, an earthenware barrel of wine that belonged to the temple, consecrated wine, from one place to the other, daf chav gimel, and the nifse karutzua shal sandaloi, and there was a strap of his sandal that broke off. Now, there's many nuances here, just to speak out one of them. A shoe that's tamei, even on the level of an av, if it breaks in a way that the broken part is no longer functional, it loses its tumah. Obviously, that was not the case. However, the sandal was made, the retzua, the strap that broke off, remained functional, not as a new function, as the same function. Today would be a good example, maybe the shoelace was taken off the shoe, but it can be reinserted. So therefore, it's not like a separate entity. It was still tamei. And not only that, but now that so what did he do? He didn't want to lose this retzua. He didn't want to lose this shoelace. So he held it. But not only did he hold it, but unatala, when he took it, he decided, he put it on top of the barrel, no problem yet. If it doesn't enter the airspace, nothing happened yet. Problem was, it fell into the airspace. Doesn't have to touch the inner part of the keli. It's good to remember these details. It just needs to enter the airspace. And now, biblically, the nitmes, just to know the details, what becomes tamei? So let me tell you how it works, my friends. If it didn't touch the wine, so then the barrel becomes tamei on a level of a rishoin mido oiraisa, because the strap is an av. And now the wine becomes tamei on a level of sheni. Even if it would be chulin, it would be tamei mido oiraisa. But you understand, that means that if this wine touches another wine, the other wine becomes a shlishi. If that wine touches yet another wine, if it's kachim, it becomes a revi. That is what happened. So at that time, because of that event, the Chazal said the following: when you're carrying something, even that's tamei on the level of midras, you are still allowed to carry truma, because this what happened is rare. However, because of that happened once, we no longer allow for anyone to carry simultaneously at the same time midras and kach. So the Gemara says, well, hold on. If you're taking that Maisa Shahoya as a reason to make a rabbinic enactment, why don't we spread it to Truma as well? Truma also may not become tamei. We have a mitzvah to guard the purity of Truma. So the Gemara answers that our Mishnah follows the same opinion of Rab Hananya ben Akavya, who elsewhere, as we will quote soon, the elsewhere also, there was a similar situation regarding something else, similar but something else, where they made an enactment, and Hananya ben Akavya holds that if there was only a one-time event, Even when everyone agreed, we got to make a takana, we limit it only to the exact scenario of that story. The Amar that he said that lo yasru elo b'yardeinu b'sfina ufamaisa shahaya. So let me speak it out by heart. Now here we're going to that which is the most susceptible to tumah, and that is chatos. Now the ashes of the paraduma didn't remain in Yerushalayim because people become impure from corpse tumah everywhere. So actually, every city had a deposit, had some place where they would store the ashes of the red heifer. And whenever people wanted to become pure, whether it is because they wanted to go to the temple or they just wanted to become pure, then they had where to go to and to go through the procedure of the third day and the seventh day, etc. Now, they once transported the ashes of the red heifer, and it was transported in a ship going over, or in a rowboat. And don't think about the QE2. When you speak about a ship in Chazal, think about they elaborated the rowboat. And it went over the Jordan River, and they discovered that in the floor of the ship, there was enough of a corpse that could convey tumas oil. Tumas oil means that if there's corpse over here, and there is something else on top, even if there's no contact, as long as the other item was over it, it becomes tamei. They discovered that the ashes of the red heifer became tamei. So they made an enactment that you may not transport the ashes of the red heifer unless your feet are on the ground. You can't ship it over a boat, and many, many other details. So some of the sages held that this decree was very broad. But Rab Hananya ben Akavia says, now you're making a decree because of a one-time event, only make a decree on exactly that scenario. Umayi, the Tanya, Chachamim, who broadened this takana hold, lo yisa adam mechatos, you may not transport either the waters that have the ashes in it, or only the ashes of the chatos, or ve'efer chatos, ve'yavidem, and take them over the Jordan River on a boat. But they added, it's not only about that. Really, in other words, the Chachamim understand that any non-ground transport is prohibited. So you can't stand on one side of the Jordan River and throw it across the other side. I know as time goes on, the Jordan River becomes less river, more and more stream. Even then, when there's some areas you needed the ship to cross over, some areas you could have thrown something from one bank to the other bank, to the other side. Or don't allow them to float across the river. They would build a raft. Can't do that. You can't even put it on an animal. In other words, if the person holding it, if that person's feet are not touching the ground, if it's a non-ground transport, all of that rabbinically was prohibited. I can't even ride on your back. If I'm riding on your back, but my feet are touching the ground, that's okay. Even though you're doing the hard work, but at least my feet are dragging on the ground. If it's completely non-ground transport, also. However, if there is a bridge crossing over a body of water, being that your feet are on the surface of the bridge, that's called ground. And that is not only isur if it's going over the Jordan River, that's going over any body of water. So hold the sages. However, no. That lo yasru ela b'yardein ubesfina uchamaisa shahayam. They made it. They enacted a prohibition. But it's only prohibited to repeat exactly as the story. And what was the story? My Maisa Shaya. That happened once with a person that he was transporting the waters of the chatos or the ashes of the chatos. And that story happened to be, he was transporting it over the Jordan River. He was in what they called a boat, what we would call a little canoe. And the nimtza kazayis meis tachu bakaki yasa shel sfina. And lodged in the floor of this sfina was a kazayis of flesh of a corpse, which is exactly enough of a part of a corpse to convey tumas oil. There wasn't physical contact, but we know that the ashes went over that kazayis. It became tamei. So then they made a takana. But again, how do we broaden it? That is a machlokes tanoim. And Rab Chananya ben Akavia says we limit it. And our Mishnah that only disallows carrying midras and kachin. We don't broaden it to truma. That's consistent with Rab Chananya ben Akavia. Okay. If Elyahu asks the Gemara, okay, sandal, Tomei, I got, you may not. But did we add not other scenarios? What about, can I carry a sandal that's tahor? Maybe sometimes the Chazal went even further. Don't even candle a sandal that's tahor. Because guys, just to know, Nida is part of nature. So is the eldest. And a zav was something, maybe not the most common thing, but these are not things that are 1 in a million. And the shoes of a zav is always midras. So there was a place to say, never carry something in your hand that could be a midras when you carry the barrel. Makes sense? Maybe did the Chazal mean to say when you carry kachin, carry nothing else? Or no, they only disallowed you carrying actual something that's midras. Question number 2. The story that happened, how did that strap fall inside? Evidently, the top of the barrel was open. Well, what happens if the top of the barrel is closed? So Chavias Pesucha, that clearly is where one may not by Kodesh. What about Chavias Sesuma? And the final question is that when we learned this in Shabbos, remember Danny about the whole sandal, Hamasumar, all these stories, a story happened, a tragedy happened. Remember these spiked sandals? You can never wear sandal Hamashum on Shabbos. It's difficult to understand it. Now, over here, since it's a one-time story, maybe unlike all of the other halachas that we're learning, that there's rabbinic tumah, things are tameh midrabanan, maybe over here, the isser was only lechatchila. But after the fact, what happens if avar v'nasa mahu? What happens if someone did carry a midras in one hand and the chavius of kodesh in the other hand, and the person says they have no contact? Did the rabbi say it becomes tamei midrabanan or not? And that's actually a machlokes. Rabbi says aval v'nasor tamei. Well, once they made the enactment, if you violate it even post facto, it is tamei rabbinically. Again, you can't burn it, but you can't consume it. You got to wait for it to become prohibited midoraisa. Abzeda says no. That aval v'nasor, then post facto here, not that they decreed an isur chefza, a tumas of the chefza. They told you not to do it, but if you did it, the barrel remains tahor. Chlal as a rule, as the Rabbeinu Hananel points out over here, that whenever we have a rabbinic halacha being debated, we are going to be lenient, which is why we paskin like Rab Zeda, even though we're speaking about kach. Okay, now I just want you to know, really in the Mishnah we're up to enactment number 4. The Gemara doesn't have to explain enactment number 4, because enactment number 4 was learned on the Mishnah on Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis. But we say that if someone is very conscientious of not becoming tummy, but his only concern is regarding truma, then his garments are considered the worst case scenario for people who eat kosher. And being that this was discussed already on Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis, so there's no need for the Gemara to explain it. And similarly, case number 5, when we said regarding chatzitza, that if you're toiveling 2 items that belong to kosher, and they are tied loosely together, then you don't have to untie it, because really by Torah law there's no chatzitza. But for kodesh you have to untie it and you have to dry it. Again, since we mentioned dinim of chatzitza in the beginning of the 3rd chapter, again the Gemara doesn't find it important to go and unpackage it. So that's why we skipped 4, we skipped 5, and now we're going to continue in case number 6. And I think that will be the last case that we'll discuss today. And again, we don't need to rush. We can go through this slowly and understand this properly. Have more time to understand, take in all this information. So what was the 6th enactment? The big chumrah, that when you make a brand new utensil, even though you know that it never became tummy, and a detail, all these details are important. Prior to it being completed, even if a source of tumah had halachic contact, it will not convey tumah to an item that's not yet a finished product. But let's say you have a factory, you are manufacturing utensils. It's becoming finished under your care. you know that when it became finished onwards, it did not become Tomei. It's not Tomei only as far as Truma is concerned. Certainly not Tomei for Ma'aser Sheni, certainly not for Chulin. For Kodesh, the rabbi says, you got to take it to the mikveh. It's Tomei. I want to add something important. On what level is it Tomei? Sheni. Just to know that. I'm adding that nuance as we'll unpackage the sugya. There's a general rule. Anything that's Tomei on a level of a Rishon or worse or an Av, even after going to the mikvah, there is a vestige of Tuma on it as far as Truma and Kachim is concerned. You got to wait until it's dark, until head of Shemesh. The Mishnah, which made no mention of head of Shemesh, the Mishnah just says that for Kodesh, you got to take it to the mikvah. Mashma, just take it to the mikvah and you're good. It means that it's only Tomei on a level of a Sheni, which is also consistent with many other rabbinic tumas that are only on a level of a Sheni. Let's go read inside. Says the Gemara, quoting the Mishnah, Kalim hanigmara betara, for Kodesh, you got to take them to the mikvah. So first we have to understand, there has to be some concern. Like, why would they become Tomei? The Gamrinu man, who is the one that was overseeing its manufactured, its completion? Who's making it? If the Gamrinu Chaver, if someone who is knowledgeable and machmir and all of the details of Tuman Tara was involved in the making of these utensils, then why would it need tefillah? If you're a Chaver and I go to your house, I can eat your food, I can sit on your bed, I'll ask you, you'll tell me, I can trust you. Why is this different? It must be odd, because when it comes to the manufacturing of kalim, maybe the Amonitz, maybe someone who wasn't that knowledgeable did it. That doesn't make sense either. As we learned yesterday, there is a general rabbinic tumah on everything that belongs to the Amonitz. Not only something that was now manufactured, that was now completed. Stam, Makeli of Amonitz, we presume is Tameh. And the Mishnah would never have used the words that nigmanim betara karalu. It's not called completed in Tara. So Amar Abba Bar Shila, Amar Rav Masna, Amar Shmuel, I'll explain to you the Mishnah. La'olam digamrinu chaver. If it belongs to Amma Aretz, of course. And by the way, not only for Kodesh, another point, for Truma also. Forget about Truma. For Chulin also. We have to presume that he doesn't know the dinner. Our case is that a person who is a chaver is the one that was overseeing or making it himself. But and he's telling you that nothing Tuma touched it, so what's the remote? There has to be some remote fear. So it answers the Gemara, Mishum Tzinoida da Amma Aretz. Tzinoida means a spittle. That if Amma Aretz was talking to him, and now because of COVID, as we were so educated that when you talk, who knows how many droplets are flying all over the place. So the Amma Aretz is speaking to the chaver while he's producing his utensil. Some of that spittle might have fallen on the utensil. Guys, an Amma Aretz rabbinically is Tomei as a Zav, because maybe he's a Zav, which means that Sinoira of the Amma Aretz, the spittle of the Amma Aretz is Tomei on the level of a Zav. Do you imagine? Now, having said that, it's not that we're saying that therefore the Keli is an Isha. We're not saying that. We're saying that they said that it's Tomei, because maybe there was some spittle of Amma Aretz. The Gemara says that doesn't make sense either. Because the Nafal Amos, when are we afraid that this spittle fell on the utensil? The chaver is only not careful prior to it being a final product. And that's taka when it could have happened. But we don't care if it happened then, because hal lav manahu, it's not halachically considered the utensil. Even if the spittle of the Amma Aretz fell on the utensil, it's not tamei. Elabasa the gomri. It must be that maybe the spittle fell on the utensil after you made it. Well, who cares? At the moment the chaver finishes making a product, he's going to be careful. No Amma Aretz will come in its vicinity and talk to him. Mizar zoibu. So what's the remote fear? Answers the Gemara. No. After it's finished, the chaver would not let Amma Aretz close. The only time an Amma Aretz would have been able to come close to this utensil is prior to it being completed. Very similar to what we learned just recently. If the spittle would have dried prior to the keli becoming finished, then taka, there's nothing. But if after it became completed, some of the spittle was still moist, halachically still considered spit or spittle, now it can become tamei, because the dilma ve'idna the gamrei. When you finish making the utensil, adayin lachahi, it's still considered moist. Now, all of this is a build-up to the next line. because you now might have erroneously said that if the chashash is the spittle of Am Haaretz, and as we mentioned, an Am Haaretz midrabanan has the tum of a zav, the spittle of the Am Haaretz midrabanan is of, the keli then becomes a rishon. If that would have been the level of tuma, then the Mishnah should have added that for kodesh you have to not only toivel it, but you have to wait. The Mishnah never said that. Is Aliyah that even though the chashash is of the spittle, but it's such a remote chashash, they didn't decree tumas rishon. They decreed only tumas sheni, which means tefilla in. Yeah, for kodesh, if you want to use it for kodesh, as far as kachim is concerned, it's tamei, and therefore you have to toivel it. But have shemesh waiting until it's night, you don't need to do that. The Gemara is not going to debate that. That understanding stands. However, oy bazoi. Now put on your thinking cap. Now it's going to get exciting. Oy bazoi, our Mishnah cannot follow Rabbi Eliezer. The Tanach, as we quote a Mishnah in Para. Now let me say the following. Paraduma, mechatos, is the most susceptible to Tuma. However, the Tzedukim, the ones who denied the authenticity or the divinity of the oral Torah, argued that a person or a utensil that's involved in the making of a paraduma, involved in the service of the paraduma, if it became tamei, not only do you have to take it to the mikvah, but they said something logical, you have to obviously wait until it's night, as we find even for truma, like we mentioned. But we know from God that's not the case. That for some reason, being that paraduma is not truma, paraduma is not even your normal consecrated kachim. It's not something that's eaten. It's not the service is not even done in the temple. Hashem allows one leniency by the paraduma, and that is that obviously if something is tamei, you got to take it to the mikvah. But after either a person or a utensil involved in any part of the service of the paraduma becomes tamei on any level, even on the level of a rishon, even if tamei mace, but it's on the seventh day and it was already sprinkled the second time and it went to the mikvah, you don't have to wait until it's dark, and it's okay. Okay, now waiting until it's dark is not a problem. You just don't need to do it. So here we have yet another time that when the Tzedukim were arguing one side, the wrong side of a halacha, Chazal enacted that to make sure that it's clear that we reject the Torah of the Tzedukim, the so-called Torah of the Tzedukim, a person and the utensils, all of it that was involved in the making and in the service of the paraduma was purposefully bidafke meitame, taken to the mikvah. No, we didn't wait until it got dark, and then they were involved in the making of the paraduma. Now, let's sing a little Tzedukah. Now, we didn't want for any observer to think that we're taking it lightly. So because of this lohoitzi miliban leniency, because of it, we made many other stringencies on the other side, including something that's very related, either mamish related or similarly related to the sixth enactment that we are learning in our Mishnah by Kodesh. And what did we learn in our Mishnah? That when you make a utensil, as far as kachim is concerned, the moment it went from being a non-utensil to now a ready-made utensil, it automatically is tamei la kodesh. Logic says it's certainly considered tamei for mechatas, because mechatas is even more susceptible than kachim. And now we'll see. Let's go read inside it. We learned in Param they regularly would transport the ashes of the chatas, as we just learned above. They would ship it all over the place. But where would they store it? They would take a reed and they would make the reed into a utensil. How would they do that? You see, a reed is something natural. You cut it off the ground, but it's like a straw. They would somehow clog it up in one side and they would make it into a tube. The moment you made it into a tube, now you made it into a halachic keli. So this shifrei feres that was cut and it was hollowed and it was prepared and now it became a keli, if it was done to transport the ashes of a chatos, so Rabbi Eliezer says Yitbol miyad. Chachamim said it's automatically tamei, related or the same of our Mishnah. We'll get to that in a moment. You take it to the mikvah, again, and you don't wait until it's dark, and now you use this hollowed out tube. Rabbi Yeshua says, not enough to declare that it's tamei. Lohoitzim elibin shel tzedukim means you take a dead sheretz. You take a source of tumah and you make halachic contact. And you take it to the mikveh and you don't wait until it's dark. They're both saying the same thing, which is that we make sure that the items, like we mentioned, that are being used for the service of the paraduma was tamei, went through the mikvah, does not have head of shemesh, and it's used. The only question is, what's the machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua? Rabbi Yeshua says you got to actually make it tamei. I'm just giving an example. Take a dead sheretz and touch it. Sheretz is an av. Make it into a rishon. Take it into the mikvah. Rabbi Eliezer says, just take it into the mikvah. And the havina ball. First of all, we have to understand why the style would it be tamei according to Rabbi Eliezer. And now we're going to have the same exact shakel v'tari we had in our Mishnah. We're going to come to the same conclusion. It's a rabbinic tumah according to Rabbi Eliezer. The chatachaman who made this tube, this reed ready. If the chatachachaver, then lamali tefillah. Why b'chal do you have to take it to the mikvah? Oh, the chatachamoritz. If an amoritz made it, why would Rabbi Yeshua say you have to make a tummy with the sheretz? Why? Hatami v'koi. It's enough. Everyone knows that amoritz rabbinically is tummy. That's direct contact. And on that, the case of the Mishnah and Torah is the chatachachaver. And what's the issue? But we are chayish, maybe spittle of amoritz had contact with the keli, and here again, when did that happen? When might have that happened? If it happened prior to you finishing this read, it's not called a mana, no problem. Even if there was such contact, if it happened afterwards, the chaver would never allow it to happen. So there again, the only time there might have been a tsunoida of amoritz is prior to you completing it, and the dilma but when you and there no one is guarding it because it's not a keli. But now that you completed it, maybe the spittle is still moist, and that is why Rabbi Eliezer holds this is mamish like our Mishnah, it becomes tamei. All of this is a build-up to explain why our Mishnah cannot be like Rabbi Eliezer. Makes a lot of sense, because what did we say? That our Mishnah considers the keli only a sheni. My friend, something that's tamei only on the sheni never needs head of shemesh. You're not being moitzi anything milipam shal tzedukim. If Rabbi Eliezer would agree with our Mishnah that this entire chashash never creates anything more than a sheni, because a sheni never needs head of shemesh. A bishlam el Rabbi Yeshua that you have to actually render it tamei. So now, by rendering it tamei, taking it to the mikveh and not waiting until night, I know the ikah, the first white line, hekeda l'tzeduk. The Tanach has been learned in Para also that metamen hoyu es hakoyim, everyone, people and utensils, they would make the koyin tamei, the one who would burn the paraduma, lohoitzi melivin shal tzedukim. That they would say that only bima oirve shemesh hoisanas is that you have to not only go to the mikveh but wait until the night. So the kohen would become tamei on the purpose, go to the mikveh and then burn the parad. Anything involved in the service was prior to head of shemesh. Elul Rabbi Eliezer, guys, 2 lines before the bottom of the Amid, Amra, this Shloima. If we would have learned Pshat in our Mishnah that this Chazal's takana on the utensil, and it would make sense to say that it's a Rishon, because if the Chashash is spittle of an Amoritz, which rabbinically has a din of a Zav, spittle of a Zav is an Av. The Keli is a Rishon. Anything that's a Rishon, mikveh head of Shemesh, even only for Truma. Kol Shchein L'Kotshchen, Kol Shchein L'Meichatos. Then, but since we were medayik in our Mishnah never mentioned head of shemesh. Our Mishnah only mentioned Tefilla, which means that I know that the fear is maybe spittle of Amoritz, maybe, but we don't know that. So even though the Chazal were machmer, they never said Rishon. They only said Sheni. That's our Mishnah. You never need head of shemesh anyways. So if since ba'alma even head of shemesh, forget about meichatas, even for kachin. If you never need head of shemesh, So my Hekeda L'Tzedukim according to Rabbi Eliezer. Perfect point. Okay, so our Mishnah won't be like Rabbi Eliezer. By the way, it's not the end of the world because Rabbi Eliezer normally follows the opinion of Beis Shammai, and we're happy when we don't follow the opinion of Beis Shammai because Beis Shammai, welcome Beis Hillel, is never, ain't a Mishnah, even though it's not Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, doesn't bother us that the Gemara says no. Our Mishnah can even follow Rabbi Eliezer. Don't confuse our Mishnah's Chumrah with Meichatas. When it comes to Kachim, all Chazal said was that the utensil is Tamei on the level of a Sheni. Get that. You don't need Herav Shemesh. Maybe, according to Rabbi Eliezer, that this utensil that was made by, again, the cover, maybe the spittle of the Amoritz, the keli that was made to transport Meichatos, there, Chazal, according to Rabbi Eliezer, gave it a higher level of Tumah. And since it has a higher rabbinic level of Tumah, taking it to the mikvah and not waiting until night, even without creating a new contact with Tumah, is a bona fide lahoitzi milibam shal tzedukim. Amarav daf chav gimel amud beis asua kitemei sheretz. That Chazal said that this utensil is as if it touched a sheretz. Now, guys, what's a sheretz? Sheretz is a av. Anything that touches a sheretz is a rishon. So even though the chashash is the same, but it could be for kodesh, Chazal gave it the status of a sheni. For meichatos, that was the takana that this utensil has a rabbinic status of a rishon. A rishon needs head of shemesh. That's why Rabbi Eliezer says, gavaldik, take it to the mikvah. Don't wait until it's night, because taka, that's the leniency that God gave. Anything connected to Mechatos doesn't need head of Shemesh. In this aspect, it's not even like Trum. Hold on. Asks the Gemara, Elamata, you're telling me that the Chazal, according to Rabbi Eliezer, decreed that a keli that's made for the service of a Mechatos, the moment it's completed, automatically is as if it touched the sheretz. Well, that only makes it into a Rishon. A Rishon, biblically, can never convey Tumah to Adam. An Adam, like we said, can never become Tamei on the level of a Sheni. So like the Tama Adam should never become Tamei. Allah Matanya, why do we learn in the Braisa that Choitcha, the one who completed this tube for the service of the red heifer, or someone who actually took it to the mikvah, umatbila, that's or someone who took it to the mikvah, that person himself has to go to the mikvah. Well, hold on. If I touch something that touched the sheretz, I don't have to go to the mikvah. So it doesn't make sense. So don't tell me, like we have in the top line of the Amid, that from Mechatos, Chazal, Rabbi Eliezer, decreed that the keli that was finalized now is as if it touched the sheretz. It was much more than that. Ella, the Gemara says, it must be that Asua Kitmei Meis. Wow. More. They said that when you finish making a utensil to be used in the service of Mechatos, the moment it finished, it's as if it touched a corpse. Now, let's go through this. If this keli touched the corpse or had halachic contact with the corpse, what is the status of this keli? An av. Now it makes sense. Now, a person who touches an av becomes a rishon. That's why the Braisa says whoever even touches this tube has to go to the mikvah. Now, we got a problem. But the problem is that if Chazal rabbinically considered this tube as if it touched the corpse, how do you get rid of the tomb of the corpse? Not enough taking it to the mikvah. Not enough umat bila. You got to have a 7 days. You got to sprinkle the ashes the 3rd day, and on the 7th day, going into the 4th line from the top. So the tube should need to be sprinkled on the 3rd, on the 7th day. And it's mashma from the Braisa that it's not needed. Allah Matanya, why did we learn that? Again, whenever you finish making a utensil for the service of the red heifer, when you finish cutting it here means, again, you did the final act that made it now functional. Here, the one who's going to take it to the mikvah, Braisa says that those people have to go to the mikvah themselves. That's all that's mentioned. From that, we infer, mikvah, yes, but azor shlishi shvius loy. Still doesn't work. So the Gemara adds another detail. Elon must be Again, rabbinically, only utensils that were made for the service of the red heifer, asur kitnei meis bashvi shaloi. It's almost like a new tumah. If I touch a corpse, I'm tamei, and I need to have 7 days, and during the 7 days I have to be sprinkled twice with the ashes of the red heifer. If I touch a sheretz, I have to go to the mikvah. Now we're saying of something in between, that it's as if it touched, it has the status of an item that 7 days ago touched a mace, is already sprinkled on the 3rd, is already sprinkled on the 7th. All that's needed is going to the mikvah, normally head of shemesh, not normal, head of shemesh. So here again, according to Rabbi Eliezer, the fact that you don't do head of shemesh, you have the lohoitzi melivin shel tzedukim. So the Gemara says, we learn in the Braisa that like we keep on mentioning, we're doing something that's not so cool. In other words, per se, we're making the person tummy, we're making the keli tummy, and then we're taking it to the mikvah. And for people not to think that we can be lenient, we're not waiting until dark. We added many stringencies to counterbalance it. So the Braisa says that even though we add many stringencies, we can't make up a brand new Isur. Now, I want you to know that the Gemara's question is not on the detail of it's as if it's already after the 3rd and the 7th day. The Gemara's question is, it never touched a mace. On any level, to make it to make mace, that's too big of a chiddush. Later, we didn't make such an innovation. So Abaye says, no, such innovations we could make. The only limitation, when the Braisa says, even though we're adding milus, we're adding stringencies, but we're not making up something completely out of the blue, that's only referring to the people who have tumah leaving their bodies, they can convey tumah on the level of a Midrash or MERCAVA moishav. But when do they convey tumah on the same level? Only if they sat, leaned, stood, lay down on an item that was meant to be sat upon. Now, what happens, my friends, if a zav would sit on an axe, on a tool that's meant to cut down trees, not meant to be used as a seat? What's going to be the halacha? The halacha is it will never acquire tumah on the level of an av. That is, says Abaye, that's the meaning of the Braisa, that even though we were very machmir to counter the leniency, we never make up a tumah. It only means we never say an item that was not meant to be sat upon could acquire midrabanan tumas mishkav u'moishav tumas midras. That we never said. And as we learned in the Braisa, based on a pasuk in Parshas Mitzayda, the pasuk says that the hayoshev alakli, if you sit down on a utensil, that is where the utensil becomes tummy on the level of the one who sat. So says the Braisa, what's going to happen if someone takes a utensil that was made as a measure? But you can turn it upside down and you can sit on it. Whether it was a container that can have in it the size of a saw, the amount of a saw. Kav is a half a saw, right? 3 kav, tar and kav. What happens if you sit on a measuring utensil? Do you convey tumazav? No, you don't. It becomes a rishon if you have contact, but it doesn't become enough because it says the hayoshev alakli asher yeshiv olav. If you sit on a utensil that was meant to be sat upon, you see the repetition. In other words, something that was made to be sat upon, that acquires tumas mishkav u'moishav. Yotza said this measuring utensil, even though people at times sit on it, it wasn't meant for it. And I'll prove it to you. If I go into your kitchen and I sit down on your chair, you're never going to kick me off your chair. I'm sitting on a chair. But if I go and I turn over a measure utensil and sit on it, you're not going to mind me sitting on it if you don't need to use the utensil. The moment you need to use the utensil, you'll say, excuse me, I got to use it. Please get up. Because we got to use it for the measurement. That's the way we define. It's not made for it to be sat upon. Other than that chiddush, we are machadish. So in conclusion, when our Mishnah says that a keli that was finalized by a chavir is not tummy, makes perfect sense. Even for truma, makes perfect sense. The mila they made for kachim is because maybe prior to it being finalized, a amaret spat on it, and now the spittle is still wet. Even though that is the fear we are correctly saying that we are only giving the keli l'kodesh the level of a sheni. It doesn't need head of shemesh. However, when it comes to kelim that are made for para aduma, even though it's a similar chayshinon, according to Rabbi Eliezer, not only did they decree on it a tumah of a rishon, they actually decreed on it a tumah of an av, but this unusual av. Doesn't need shlishi and shvi. It yes needs mikvah. And again, it needs mikvah. And now this keli is going to be used for truma or kachim, or you bet you may not use it until it gets dark. And again, they daska wants you to use it prior to it getting dark. We'll stop over here, and God willing, tomorrow, 6 o'clock in the morning, we're going to continue with the 7th chumrah of the Mishnah, to be continued.
Rabbi, what was the whole big deal about the hair of Shemesh? That became such a, a point of contention between the Tzedukim and the whatever. The Chachamim.
In other words, how the Tzedukim got to that point by using logic, push it, because Tanach makes a lot of sense, and that's not part of the oral tradition. Since it became a point of contention, the onus was on us. We had a drasha that's not the pshat, but it's what God said, from which we learned that for para, for mechatas, even though again it's kachim, but it's not kachim. It's not done in the temple. It's not truma. We don't need head of shemesh. And since they argued with it, so we dug in, we drew a line in the sand. We have it here. We had it already. We just had it now, Danny. When it comes to the Shavuos Sunday, that when Shavuos was on Shabbos, and the days that everyone brought their korbanos, even according to Basil, was on Sunday, right? So then we didn't treat that Sunday like Yisro Chag. We made sure it's a complete weekday.